Hello, my fabulous students. This is a screencast for you for lesson 2.2, which is all about characteristics of life. I'm just going to go through your Google slide presentation with you. This is our important terminology that we need to make sure that we at least can understand and be able to use. The concept that I need you to process and to be thinking about is the fact that all of these characteristics, that living things have to have all these characteristics to be considered alive. Maybe not the single individual itself, but members of the whole entire species or the whole population have to have these characteristics. And I also need to make sure that you guys process and think about what it actually means to be alive. And that would be that it would have all these characteristics of life. And also to differentiate between being a unicellular organism and a multicellular. So here indeed are our list of characteristics of life. So I'm going to go through these with you today in this class. Okay, so organisms are organized at the level of a cell. So a cell is the smallest unit that has all these characteristics of life. There are organisms that are only one cell, and that is it. And if an organism is only made out of one cell, it's not a very specialized cell because it's a cell that's going to have to do all the functions necessary to maintain life. If a cell is multicellular, then that means it's made of many cells, and those cells will be specialized. So depending on the complexity of the organism, there may be thousands of different types of cells all doing different types of jobs for the organism. And if it is an organism that is particularly large, it's going to be made of significantly more cells than an organism that is smaller. Okay? All organisms have the ability to reproduce. The single individual may not have the ability to reproduce, but all the members of the species as a characteristic will have the ability to reproduce. There are two primary ways that reproduction can take place. There's asexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, there's only a single member of the population that is able to make offspring. Those offspring often are genetically identical to the parent. Now, DNA can indeed mutate and change. So from one generation to the next, the DNA may mutate and change in such a way so that offspring are slightly different from the parent. But for the most part, the genetic material is going to be very similar. On the other hand, if an organism is reproducing sexually, we need two different individuals. Each individual is going to offer 50% of its genetic information to its offspring. So the offspring are going to be a new genetic combination that did not exist in either parent. And this is particularly interesting because what it allows sexually reproducing organisms to do is every generation is genetically a little bit different than the generation before. And this is actually one of the things that fuels the process of evolution. There are some organisms that can indeed do both, depending on certain circumstances. There are some organisms that can both asexually and sexually reproduce. Most organisms that are more complex, okay? So a lot more complexity in terms of their organs and their organ systems. Most of them are sexually reproducing organisms. All living things have to be able to have a way to metabolize. So metabolism is referring to a series of chemical reactions that are happening within the cells of organisms that allow them to be able to convert energy from one form to another. No living thing on this planet makes its own energy. The energy has to come from someplace else. And in terms of examples of metabolic processes, there are two that you may be very familiar with. One would be photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is a metabolic process, right? A plant converts energy from the sun, and it stores that energy in another form. And that form is what's known as a glucose molecule. And that glucose molecule is what you and I think of as food. So when we say in middle school, plants make their own food, what they're really doing is they're utilizing the energy from the sun, they're utilizing molecules from their environment, they're chemically rearranging those molecules, and they're both called a glucose molecule. And that glucose molecule can ultimately provide energy to either the cells of the plant or the cells of whatever eats that plant. For us, of course, we do not photosynthesize. Every living thing on the planet, no matter what type of organism it is, also experiences a type of metabolic process known as cellular respiration. And that's the process of taking glucose and converting it into another form of energy. So when we talk about metabolic processes, we're talking about the chemical methods of a cell or a multicellular organism taking energy from one form and converting it into another form. All living things have to have an energy source. All organisms experience growth and development. So if an organism is getting larger, it's actually making more cells and gaining mass, okay? And then, of course, there's development, and development just refers to any changes that an organism is experiencing. So an organism might not be growing and getting larger, but it may indeed change. So the example I like to use with you guys in class is I say to you, well, I'm not really growing anymore. I'm the same height I've been since I was 15. And I really haven't changed my weight much since I was about 15, 16 either. But I am certainly developing. I am getting older. I am getting wrinkles. I'm getting gray hair. Okay, my body is still developing and changing. And that's the case for all living things. And I just threw this picture up there of the caterpillar to the butterfly to get you thinking about changes. That's a pretty dramatic change, that metamorphosis, right? But it still is representing changes that an organism experiences during its lifespan. Maintaining homeostasis. So this can be a very challenging concept, and we're going to spend a lot more time talking about the maintenance of homeostasis throughout the school year. I'm going to give you some examples to try to help you understand what this means. So when an organism is maintaining homeostasis, what the organism is doing is it's working to maintain certain variables within what we refer to as an optimum range. An optimum range, we're going to use the word optimum often in this class instead of using the word better or best, because those are opinion-based terms. So when we say optimal, we are referring to a situation in which an organism can maximize all of its bodily functions so that it can function, okay, and do all the things necessary to maintain life. So I have a couple examples listed on this slide: water balance, constant body temperature, and a consistent sugar or glucose level. I'm going to talk to you about body temperature in this screencast because I think that this is the example that makes the most sense in the very beginning of this course, like we are right now. So if you think about it, for us to maintain our optimum body functions, okay, human beings have a specific body temperature. It's right around 98.6 degrees. Some people run up slightly warmer or slightly cooler, but it's not that much different than 98.6 degrees. That's because that's the temperature that all of the chemicals in our body are functioning at a very specific speed that are allowing all of our body functions to happen as quick as they possibly can so that we can maintain our life functions. If our body becomes too cold, there are things that our body will do to respond. Now, of course, we have behaviors. We can put on more clothes if we get too cold, but no matter how much clothes we put on, we may still continue to get cold. So the way the body will respond is you will start to shiver. You'll also get goosebumps. So this is not something that you can control. It is a response to maintain body heat. So when we shiver, our muscles are contracting very quickly and they're releasing heat. And so this is an effort of the body to try to maintain that 98.6 degrees if our body gets too cold. Now, if our body becomes as cold as 96, 95, now our body is in hypothermia. Our body starts to shut down, our systems start to shut down, our body does not function optimally, and we can die. So if we go too far outside of what we call the optimum range, our body is not maintaining homeostasis. The other side, the flip version of that, what if our body becomes too hot? I'm not talking about running a fever. We'll discuss this a little bit later in a future lesson. So if you're not running a fever, your body temperature is around 98.6 degrees. So if we start doing things that cause our body heat to rise, like maybe exercising, our body responds and we start to sweat. What sweat is doing is it's ultimately a cooling device for our body, because as that sweat evaporates from our skin, it has a cooling property. So it's the body responding in such a way to keep the body temperature within a very specific range. And that range varies for different organisms. Okay, so it is species specific. Okay, so I want to give you a graphic to kind of get you thinking about this. On the next slide, there is a video to help you understand homeostasis, which you can most certainly choose to watch because, of course, this is your Google slide presentation that I'm using. So if you want to watch that video, it's only about a 2 or maybe it's about a 3-minute video, do that, okay? So here's that next slide, has that video. I'm not going to show it to you in the screencast, but it would be a good idea to review it if you want some help thinking about homeostasis.
What is homeostasis?
Whoa, sorry about that. So this is a graphic to kind of help you understand this concept of an optimum range. So whatever the variable may be, it could be the amount of water in our body, it could be temperature, it could be the amount of glucose that's in our bloodstream. There is a specific range. If it gets too high, the body will need to respond to bring it back to that range. If it gets too low, the body's going to need to respond to bring it back to that range. If our body is existing outside that range, it puts our body into physical stress. So our body has to start working a lot harder to bring the body back to the optimum range. And if our body goes way beyond that range, so let's continue to use temperature as the example. If our body becomes 94, 93, we are now in a place where the body system could shut down and death occurs. And when that happens, the organism is not maintaining homeostasis. If the body becomes too hot, think about it. If you do run a fever, there are certain temperatures where you will get rushed to the hospital because you could die. 104, 105. That's a situation in which you might have to go to an emergency room because now your body's not maintaining homeostasis. And if you stay in that condition for too long, you could die. So homeostasis is very closely related to response and stimuli, which we're going to talk about in a few moments. So for an organism to be able to maintain homeostasis, either the cells or the tissue or the organs or the full organism is going to need to respond to stimuli. Stimuli would be anything that's causing that organism to exist outside of that optimum range. And we will look at more examples together in class. Response to stimuli. So I do have a couple little videos here just to get you thinking. Lots of times people only think that animals respond to stimuli. All living things respond to stimuli, including plants. So this video represents something called a sensitive plant. When you touch it, literally the leaves will close off. This next slide, and I did not mean to play that. Sorry, guys. This next slide is a video that I'm not going to show you now, but it's time-lapse photography of plants growing toward the sunlight. Okay, so that again is a response to the direction where the sunlight is located. Okay, this is going to play, so I'm going to try to make sure that doesn't happen. Whoops. Okay, so response to stimuli is all about an organism changing in such a way, acting in such a way, a behavior, doing something that's going to help the organism maintain homeostasis. Okay, evolution. Single organisms do not evolve during their lifetime. However, whole entire populations evolve. So evolution is really based on two things. One, genetics, so that the organism's hereditary material over many generations does change. Remember earlier I mentioned that sexually reproducing organisms make offspring that are genetically a bit different than the parents. So with every generation, we're seeing little changes in the DNA. Even if it's an asexually reproducing organism, DNA mutates. And when DNA changes or mutates, it's very likely that different traits, we start to see different traits in organisms. And this is what we refer to as evolution. Every living thing experiences evolution because every living thing also has what's referred to as hereditary material. So DNA is an example of hereditary material, so is RNA. So this is the very fascinating molecule that has the code, the genetic code that ultimately determines all of our traits. So with every generation, DNA could possibly mutate. It could also recombine in an organism if it's a sexually reproducing organism. And that's part of what fuels the evolutionary process. Okay? And this concludes our screencast. I hope that this clarified things for you a little bit. And if you think that you would benefit from watching those videos, go ahead, go into that Google slide presentation and feel free to rewatch those videos.